Hi, this is Shari Levitin. I'm president and CEO of the Levitin Group. We're an international training and consulting group focusing on employee retention and increasing revenues. I'm excited to share with you today my brand new book, Heart and Sell, the 10 universal truths every salesperson needs to know. Well, several years ago, I was performing a training seminar down in Cancun, Mexico, when a man in the back of the room raised his hand. And he said, Shari, I really like all the techniques that you're teaching us, but if we use those, isn't the client going to feel sort of manipulated? And I thought, oh gosh, that's a great question. I'd never been asked that before, so it sort of threw me. And I said, give me a moment and let me think about it till tomorrow and I'll give you an answer. Well, that night, fortunately, I was invited to go out with the top salespeople at that particular sales site. And the very top salesperson introduced himself to me as Apapacho. I said, Apapacho, I'd never heard that name before. And then he told me it was a nickname for hugger or affectionate one. And he said, I have a confession to make. I've never had any formal sales training, but I'm number one. I guess I'm just Apapacho. I love my customers. Well, at that moment, I knew I had the answer for the man in the back of the room. And it really spurred some thought. And over the next several years, I started asking myself some questions. Are salespeople born or made? Is it nature or nurture? What's more important, genuine empathy, caring, and Apapacho, or technique? And so I went on a mission to find answers to these questions. I talked to top sales leaders, salespeople in several different industries all over the world. And whenever I talked to someone, I tried to see what is it that they're saying, what is it their top performers are not saying, and what really makes the difference between a very top salesperson and someone who's mediocre, because very often they're using the exact same words, the same process. Why is there such a disparity in their performance? And what I came to realize is that top performers understand the new science of selling, but more than that, they balance that with heartfelt connection. In other words, they not only know how to connect to a customer, they know how to connect to themselves, their authentic selves. And if you don't connect with yourself, you can't connect with a customer or anyone else for that matter. So my realization was what you do matters, what you say and do, but who you are matters more. So the 10 universal truths bring together all of the sales skills that you need to have. But I think for the first time in any sales book, it combines it with who you need to be as a person, the integrity, the reliability, how you remain optimistic when times are hard, how you face rejection. So I've blended the two together. In today's era of fake news, it's called the post-truth era, authenticity, reliability, and integrity are more important than ever before. In fact, a Gallup poll found that customers, the only people that had a worse reputation for customers than salespeople were members of Congress. So we're in a time where customers naturally default to distrust over trust. You don't do empathy. You don't do reliability. Like I said, it's who you are. And salespeople need to learn how to truly be curious in order to ask questions, how to truly grow and learn and want to understand what's going on in the mind of the consumer and how to manage their own emotional state. David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, wrote a great book called Character. And I quote him in my book. What he says is that we all have two types of virtues. We have resume virtues, those things we're good at, like drive and our experiences. But we also need to think about our eulogy virtues. Virtues like kindness, virtues like integrity, virtues like courage. These are all things that need to be combined for us to have long-term success. I think too many people are concerned about what skills they bring to the marketplace. They're great at building outer skills, but they lack in building inner character. And unless we have inner character, salespeople won't make it a profession. It'll just be a job. And today it needs to be a profession, something that we take seriously. Well, top sales reps always have a sales structure. So that begins with having the right process. I find too many people just sort of wing it. And if the customer says, well, we want a demo now, they forget that warm up trust building stage, or what's worse, they don't do a good discovery and find out what's important to the customer. So it begins with having a great structure. And I outline that structure that you need to have in my book. But more than that, top performers are constantly managing and being aware of the emotional state of their customer. They know when to back off. They know when to turn up the heat. They sort of have a balance, as I say, between heart and sell. And I give an example. I'm going to give you two characters. There's Susie, the approval speaker. She is very amiable, and she's amiable to a fault. And you may see a little of yourself in Susie. Susie is so nice that at the end of a demo or presentation, the customers want to invite her over for Thanksgiving dinner. In fact, the relationship gets so strong that she doesn't really want to ask for the order because it might be offensive. Susie, the minute she gets any resistance, drops the price. She throws in the kitchen sink, the trip to Africa, in an effort to please and accommodate the client. Susie also has a habit of not prospecting for new customers. She just sort of services the one she has. So she never gets new deals. And obviously Susie doesn't make it very long in sales. Now, counterbalance that with Tony. You may know of a Tony, or you may see some signs of Tony in yourself. Tony gets very frustrated when he hasn't made a sale in a long time. Tony's very aggressive. He's got a lot of cliches. Tony also wants to get on with the program. He looks for what's wrong, why his customers won't buy instead of why they will buy. He feature dumps instead of finding out what's truly important to his customer. But the worst thing, when Tony doesn't make a sale, he blames everybody else for his lack of success instead of looking inside and saying, what could I do different? How could I improve? I tell salespeople all the time, we can't take the glory for being great if we won't take the responsibility when we're not. When we don't get a sale, that's fine so long as we learn from it. So Tony never learns. Now, that middle ground is the salesperson who is respectfully assertive. And respectfully assertive salespeople know that they need to build relationship, they need to establish trust, they need to really care, but then they need to ask the tough questions. They need to ask the questions that take courage. I love this. Brene Brown tells us that the very root of courage, or COUR, comes from the word heart. So I always say, when you truly believe in your product, you'll have the heart or the courage to ask the customer the difficult questions. One of my sales managers used to call it, you get out on the skinny branches. The question you're afraid to ask, you must ask. The person you're afraid to contact, you must contact. We don't need to work harder, we need to work smarter. We need to get out of our comfort zones. Think of this for a moment. We're asking our customers every day to get out of their comfort zone. We need to get out of ours. So the key is that respectfully assertive salesperson who asks the tough questions, asks for the order. When they get an objection, they realize you have to have no before you can get to a yes. No doesn't stop them anymore. They keep on going. And so those are the two ways we balance, through the actual structure and through constantly gauging the emotional state of our customers. You know, I find most salespeople think to get trust, you need to get the customer to like you. And actually, that's backwards. In order to earn trust, salespeople need to look for something to like about their customers. Trust starts with empathy. We have to actually care. We have to know how to listen. And rapport is a precursor to empathy. So the question then becomes, how do I build rapport? And I'll also say that when you go through the techniques, I'll call them, to build rapport, it actually increases your caring. So going through the motions will make you like that person better. It's not like, oh, I need to like the person in order to make a sale. It's something you work on. Some of the techniques I talk about in my book in regards to building rapport or every time you meet with a customer or whether you're on the phone, find one thing to like about them. Be interested in their battles. I say everybody's got a story. I mean, if you think about it, when we actually slow down, which a lot of people don't do today, we're always on the phone checking texts. But if you're at a bus stop or you're at a restaurant, you have a minute and you just let the serendipitous relationships happen, you'll find everybody has an interesting story if you'll just look for it and stop and listen. And that's what salespeople need to do. Instead of thinking, okay, do they qualify? Am I going to get a sale here? Does this person have anything I need? Look for what's interesting about that person. I tell my son all the time, be interested, not interesting. Don't tell them all about what your product does. First, listen and find something interesting about your client. Second, I say, notice the purple hats. What's a purple hat? Well, we've all heard the expression, notice the elephant in the room. And what that means, if I were to invite you to my home here in Park City, Utah for dinner, and let's say you're walking up the steps to my house, you smell this fabulous steak, you kind of can smell garlic, and you look inside and there's a big window, but in the living room to the left, there's a circus elephant, literally planted in the room. Question, do you say anything? Do you say, what's up with the elephant? Or do you ignore it, have appetizers, a glass of wine, and proceed to eat the steak? Well, if you're a good salesperson, you're going to mention the elephant in the room. That's where that saying comes from. But what I like to do is take that analogy and take it a step further and say there's a lot of elephants in the room. And great salespeople, if you're going to build rapport, you have to call people out on it. So we've all had the customer when we're meeting with a customer in person that has a funny feathered hat, or they've got tattoos all over their arm, or maybe they're constantly looking at their watch. We need to call out the elephant in the room and say, God, that's amazing. How did you get those 46 tattoos? Or what a fun hat. These people are shouting, notice me. And if we don't notice them, it's going to get in the way of rapport building and the relationship. Not everybody's going to look like us and be like us. That's not how life is. So we need to celebrate others' differences and even call attention to them if they are. The third thing that I talk about in building rapport is let the customers talk about themselves. Now, this sounds so obvious, but a Harvard Business Review article just showed that on the average, people, if left alone, would talk about themselves 60% of the time. And that number goes up on social media to, yes, 80%. So think about your posts, think about what you do online, and 80% of the time, it's all about our favorite subject, which is me. Now, neuroscience tells us that when we talk about ourselves, there's a hormone that's released, oxytocin. It actually makes us feel good. It's the same hormone that's released when we breastfeed, have sex, or eat good food. So there's a reward mechanism. And so we constantly talk about ourselves. Now, if we can have the self-control and the self-awareness to say, wait a minute, who do I want to have the dopamine rush, me or my client? My client. Because if my client feels good, he or she is more likely to pay attention and buy from me. So again, it sounds easy, but it takes discipline to listen more when we talk. So those are just some rapport building skills. I outline 8 of them. And like I said, it's a precursor to empathy, and trust is the most important thing in any sales process. The most important thing I tell salespeople is don't ever stop presenting or pitching until you've done what I call a good discovery or needs analysis. We all have different names for it. Salespeople get so excited about their product offering that they end up prematurely elaborating or demonstrating their product before they get the what's in it for the customer. People today have a very short attention span. So we need to travel the most direct route. And if we don't get the right answers to the right questions, we end up going places and we lose the customer. I call it being factually correct and emotionally incorrect. So we go through these long-winded presentations. We tell the customer all about how our product works. We show them the data, and we lose them in the process because our attention span is so short. I give an analogy called travel the most direct route. Now, imagine for a moment that you're going on a road trip. So wherever you live, I live in the United States, so I'll use a United States example. If you live in the East Coast and you're going on a road trip to the West, or you live in the West and you're going on a long road trip to the East, no doubt when you start, you have a GPS, you know where you're going because you want to travel the most direct route. Now, if you don't have a GPS, you might end up going here, you might stop at a concert, you might go to a jazz show, whatever it is, but you're not going the most direct route. And what happens is when you do this with a customer, they run out of gas. You confuse them, you lose them. So what's important is that you ask the exact relevant questions that you need to ask, no more or no less, and then you tailor make your presentation to those answers, or what I call the what's in it for me. Now, a way to do this, I call it the big four. There's 4 types of questions you need to ask that will give you 4 different types of information. The first type of question you need to ask is what I call a first level question, or a fact question. Now, a first level question will reveal the facts of a customer situation. What type of software are you using now? When are you looking at migrating? How many employees do you currently have? How many would you like to have? We need to get the facts. That's important. But I find 80% of salespeople stop there. It's the salespeople that move deeper, that get to the second level and third level, or what I call heart questions, that always outsell the competition. Second level questions, or what I call bone questions, I call first level skin, second level bone, you get into the bone, are questions that elaborate on first level questions. Questions like, why did you decide to migrate your software? They also uncover a problem. What's the biggest challenge you're currently having? If you could change anything about what you're doing, what would it be? That's a second level or a bone question, but third level questions are where sales are made. Third level questions penetrate into the heart of the customer and they get personal, up close and personal. They say, how would having better customer service affect you personally? What legacy would you like to leave? You see, when we understand what drives our customers personally and emotionally, they're more likely to act. We all know people buy an emotion and justify it with logic. So how do we get inside those emotional motivators? And I talk about 7 core emotional motivators that cause anybody to do anything in life. Well, no one cares if there's only 2 left of what you're selling if they don't want it in the first place. And I find too many salespeople threaten scarcity, or they say the price is going to go up if you don't buy it now. But if the customer isn't emotionally committed to what it is you're selling, there's no urgency. So there's 3 steps to urgency. Step number 1 is we need to make sure that the customer is emotionally committed to what you're selling. How do you do that? We just talked about that. Find out the what's in it for them. You've got to find out why they would buy it factually. You need to find out what problems will occur if they don't purchase. You need to uncover what's the emotional motivator that would induce them to purchase. And one thing I didn't mention in that last section is, and you need to uncover any possible objections. That's actually the last of the big 4. So there's 3 steps to creating urgency. Number 1, uncover this what's in it for me. But then what you need to do is you need to confirm back to the customer that what you heard is in fact what they meant. I call this the information confirmation phase. To give you an analogy, I'm a rock climber, and one of the key call outs when you're climbing is you would say, because it's a life or death situation when somebody's holding you, they would say, on belay. I would say back, climbing. And then the person at the top would say, climb on. This is considered a feedback loop. And without that feedback loop, it could be very lethal. It's the same for a salesperson. We need a feedback loop. So salespeople need to repeat back what they think they heard. And there's a formula for that. And then very often the customer will say, oh yes, and I forgot to tell you that such and such. And that valuable piece of information might make the difference between a sale and a no sale, or including a decision maker that needs to be present if you're going to have any chance of getting the sale. So I would say we're going to start with getting the information. Then we need the information confirmation or the feedback loop. But here's where most salespeople lose it. Good salespeople actually do a discovery. Better salespeople engage in the feedback or the information confirmation. They understand what the customer said. But what the best salespeople do is then they take that information that they've obtained and they link it to their product or service in an emotional way. They create an experience that gets the customer excited. That's what creates urgency. How do we do that? Well, there's several ways. I can tell you the most effective way is through third-party testimonials. People don't believe it when we say it. They believe it when somebody else says it. Look at Yelp reviews. Look what's happening with social media. People want to know people like me have used the product and have benefited from the product. So one thing I tell salespeople, and we do entire storytelling workshops, is you've got to craft ahead of time third-party testimonials that are evocative. And you want a story that will hit their emotional motivator, one that will solve their problems, one that will overcome their objections. And when you can be a master storyteller, what happens is you shift the emotional state of the customer and you create action for them to buy. It will shorten your sales cycle. Well, if you think about it, very few things worth getting or having are gotten without some resistance, right? If you think about your own life, there's been a struggle to overcome in order to get what you want. We've also, as salespeople and sales leaders, always heard the adage, no objections, no questions, no sale. So we have to hear the word no to understand what the customer doesn't want so we can gauge to what they do want. Problem is, too many salespeople cower at the word no. They fold, they take it personally. They can't handle the rejection. There's many techniques that you can employ when you hear no. And these could happen at any step in the sales process. They could happen when you're prospecting, and they could happen during your sales demo. We could get objections, or at the very end of your sales presentation. And a no might sound like, well, we need to get with the board. We'll let you know. Could you send us a proposal? This is death. Salespeople writing all these practice proposals and them never turning into anything. What the best salespeople do is when they get any resistance at all, they look at it as an opportunity to find out what is the real objection or concern that the customer might have. So I'm going to break this up and talk about during the actual sales process or demo, how you might deal with an objection. But then I want to talk about at the very end because you need to handle each one differently. When we hear objections during our demo or during the sales process, or whether we're on the phone, the first thing that you need to do is really stop and listen and let the customer finish their train of thought. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. I can tell you, often the customer will have an objection and 2 seconds later they'll say, well, but it's not that important to my buying. And if we interrupt them, we're showing a huge lack of empathy. The other thing you want to do when this happens, yes, you're going to listen, but you also want to, as part of that, validate the concern. Validate how they're feeling. Wow, I understand that this is a huge initiative. You're going to have to involve IT. You're going to have an onboarding process. You're so busy right now with other acquisitions. I can understand how that might be a concern. When there's something funny about when we validate someone else's concerns, we're giving them permission to go on and tell us what else or what might really be underneath the concern, which leads me to the second technique, and that is to understand that very often objections are questions in disguise. So as a salesperson, you want to think, okay, what's the real objection here? What's going on? I teach a class at the business school here in Utah called Pitch Perfect. And one of my students gave me a great example of this. He's selling aircraft equipment to the government. And the customer asked him, how much testing have you done on this particular aircraft? Well, fortunately, the salesperson was smart enough to hear, what's he really asking? Does he now want to take out data and all of these manuals about all the testing that's been done? Or is the customer really saying, are they safe? What they were really asking is, are they safe? And so he went ahead and answered that. and ended up winning the deal. So always ask yourself, if you hear an objection or a no, is there really a question in there? And then what you want to do towards the end of the sales cycle, when you get, I call it an excuse. You get something like, we need to run it by the board. We'll let you know. Could you write us a proposal? The most important thing I can tell salespeople and sales leaders is work on techniques to isolate the true objection. We are so quick, like Susie, to say, okay, well, let me know. I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. But you don't know the real objection. We're like, Tony, you would drop the price. No, not a good idea, because you don't know the real objection. I talk about that there's really only 6 real objections to purchasing anything. We need to get to one of those 6. Otherwise, we simply aren't dealing with the real objection. We might be dealing with an excuse. And that's best done through isolation techniques. Now, what does that mean? If a customer says, I need to run this by the board, a way to isolate how they feel is you might say, okay, that's great. Let me ask you this. If the board approves it, is this something that you feel would be beneficial to you and your company? So you're taking that away. You're putting it on a shelf, right? You're putting it on the side. Other than that, other than the fact that your board needs to approve it, how do you feel about it? And there's many, many similar techniques, but that's just one of them that I'd like to share. I think as writers, we often write about those things we want to learn about and skills that we want to master. And what's most intriguing to me about Heart and Sell is conversations about growth, rejection, and happiness and contentment. And these aren't skills that you all of a sudden have. They're life skills that we need to continually work on. And happiness and optimism is a skill that needs to be practiced, and we need to work on it. One of the things I say in the book is that too often we think, oh, if only I had a better job, then I'd be happy. If only I had this magic closing pill, then everything would be great. If only I had a different job, a different man, a different this, a different that, then life would be perfect. And actually, research shows us that it's the other way around. That if we can work on being happy, content, and optimistic now, we will actually create more success. Sean Anker talks about this in his famous TED Talk, and he says very often people have the happiness formula backwards. Happiness fuels success. What happens when we're happy and optimistic, again, all this dopamine floods our brain. We're more creative, more resourceful, and life just works out better for us. So what I do now is I practice happiness rituals, and I think in any situation about what I do have, not what I don't have. I look for what's right in people, not for what's wrong in people. And I am thankful every day for what I have. And it may sound corny, but I can tell you, when you wake up happy and you redefine what it is to be content, everything flows from there. And my business is booming, but most importantly, my personal life is in such a great place. I'll also tell you that when you know why you're doing what you're doing, when you find your purpose, and I just became a mother, I adopted my son a few years ago. And I think it's really important. In sales, we get so much rejection. So if we have a higher purpose, I'm doing this to make my son proud, or I'm doing this to help salespeople feel proud about their profession and to bring integrity back into sales, it'll keep you going even when the times get tough. So I encourage you to do 2 things. Number 1, follow rituals that will make you happy now. There's no such thing as if only. And when you're in sales, whether you're in management or in leadership, define your purpose. We spend an awful lot of time asking customers why they want something, and not nearly enough time asking ourselves why we want it. And only when we find our purpose can we keep on keeping on when times get tough. And in sales, they can get tough.